Hi, and welcome. Thanks so much for joining us again. We're excited to have you in with us today because we're going into part 2 of our 10 toxic people that you want to avoid in life, marriage, and just everywhere that you ever go. But last week we talked about the first 5 toxic people. If you missed it, you can go back and take a listen. But we talked about people like the manipulator, the judge, the victim, the gossip, and my personal favorite from last week was the social media attention seeker.
Yes, we love that one. So let's get right into our next type of toxic people to avoid, and that is negative Norman.
Oh, Norman.
Yeah, some people seem to think that it is a gift in life to point out everything that's wrong, right? Negative people struggle to see the good in everything. They feed off of other people's negativity, either in person, often online. They seem to truly enjoy being miserable. I can't imagine. They're quick to find problems, always ready to complain about something or someone, and they love a good conspiracy theory if it fits their agenda.
We don't know any people like that ever today. So, but I remember working at a church, this was years ago, and I've worked at several different churches, a lot of different staff members, and for the most part, we've had great people, but this particular person just seemed to not want to work there, didn't want to be there, was always complaining. We'd have meetings and they would always object to something. I don't think we can do it because of this, or I don't want to do that because of that. And it was just like this constant cloud of negativity. And it got to the point where I just thought maybe they're just unhappy. They don't want to be here. But for me, I did the whole thing. You ever been somewhere and you've seen somebody and you go a different direction? Because our offices were close, but I was just always close the door. I didn't want to be around them because I didn't need that negativity impacting me.
Yeah. And negative people are toxic because that negativity can seep into you. And if you're around it for too long, that's bound to happen. These types of people, they taint your mind. And it might not be noticeable at first. Maybe you think that you're just being a good friend and letting them vent. But after a while, you start to notice that it's coming out of you as well. And if you couple that with a situation where maybe you're struggling with anxiety or depression, and it really is just a recipe for disaster.
Yeah. So in order to deal with negative people, there's a couple things that I found work really well. Really just a couple of options you have. Number one, you can just cut them out of your life, all right? And sometimes, honestly, you can do that and it's not a huge deal. But if you feel like maybe that's not an option or you haven't quite reached that point yet, then clarity is of the utmost importance. When you're talking to a person who's constantly negative, clearly express how that negativity is impacting and affecting you. And if necessary, you can even be prepared to give them an example or two. Now, they may not be receptive to that. And if they want to sit there and have a debate and they want to be negative about you coming to them with this objection and with these issues that you're having and you're trying to do it in a healthy way, then it may be just time to exit the relationship and move on to someone else.
Yeah, that's good advice. You might not know, but negative Norman, he has a cousin.
Really?
He does. And her name is Helpless Harriet. Yes. Helpless people are constantly in need and they're emotionally clingy. Instead of relying on God, they put other people in the place of God and rely heavily on them instead. They play the part of the damsel in distress.
I could be a beautiful damsel.
I don't think we want to see that. But they can't do anything on their own. And at first, it might feel like you're making a meaningful difference in their life by taking time to help them. But then you're hit with being asked for even more help. And the cycle just continues until you realize that you're now in a place where you have nothing left to give. Or you realize that what you're giving is never going to be enough because helpless people always want more and they're never satisfied. Right. They might even talk in circles justifying why their next need is even different, or maybe they might promise you that this is the very last time that they're going to ask for your help.
Yeah, it's always the last time. This is the last time, right? I've seen this one play out a lot of times, and the person sucked into the helpless person's vortex is usually a person who has the gift of compassion or maybe generosity. So they're great at helping other people. But what ends up happening, unfortunately, is they get taken advantage of by a helpless Harriet type person. And I can think of a couple at a church. They are such wonderful wonderful people and they really just want to help others. And so they have a family member, they're trying to help her out, and she has a daughter and she's had a lot of problems, some addiction, different things going on. So they said, hey, move into our place for free. We'll help raise your daughter, basically. We'll take care of everything while you get back on your feet and, get going with your life. Sounds great. She's really excited, really just appreciative of everything at first. But then after a while, she comes back and she needs a little bit more and a little bit more. And well, I need you to do this. And why aren't you doing that? And it's just like you said, it's never enough. And maybe you can identify with that story. Maybe you have people in your life that are kind of like that.
Yeah, well, when it comes to dealing with a helpless person, you have to realize that you aren't and can never be their savior. And it's at that point that you can make a decision to simply use the word no.
What?
Yeah, I know. You don't have to justify or explain why you're saying no. You simply need to step away. And they might blame you for doing that you're not helping them anymore, but their actions are not showing you respect. And perpetually, it's only going to serve to enable them if you continue to help them every time that they ask. Establishing boundaries with them until they're ready to show appropriate appreciation and work towards taking responsibility for their own situation is really your best move.
Yeah, that's a good word. Some of you out there, you can say the word no, like it still exists. You can try it. It feels good sometimes.
It does.
But we want to continue moving through our list of toxic people. And the next one is Prideful Peter. All right. You may know one of these people, one of these prideful people. They're sometimes one of the most annoying people because they know it all, right? Every conversation turns into them proving how much they know or how much more they know than every other person who's in the room. They got to be the smartest, the brightest, the best, right?
Yeah.
And if you have the audacity to actually challenge them, they're going to quickly come back against you. They're going to look to denigrate you or prove that you're an idiot or a moron for even having that type of thought that you just spoke into existence. How dare you? They refuse to listen to your ideas, and that toxic attitude permeates wherever they are. People don't want to talk to them because they have fear that they're either going to be belittled or they simply refuse to chime in because they know that they're going to be tuned out. It's a waste of time. And prideful people kill morale, they blow up marriages, and ultimately, sadly, they destroy families.
Yeah, and the Bible has a lot to say about pride. In fact, Proverbs is filled with verses about pride. Chapter 11, verse 2 says, when pride comes, then comes disgrace, but with humility comes wisdom. And 16:5 says, the Lord detests all the proud of heart. Be sure of this, they will not go unpunished. And Proverbs 16:18, pride goes before destruction, a haughty spirit before a fall.
Yeah, that's hard to hear if I'm being honest, because pride's the one toxic area that I would say on our list I struggle with the most. And it's caused a lot of pain over the years in our marriage, in our family. And I had to realize that just because I have a take on something, just because I have an opinion, which I have an opinion on everything,
yes.
All right, it doesn't mean I have to give it. Like the world's not going to come to an end, a screeching halt, if I don't share what I'm thinking in that moment.
Right.
And listen, as a follower of Jesus, ask God to help him to root some pride out of you. I will tell you, that probably is going to require some humility, and that's going to be a painful process, but it's a necessary process. And if you're dealing with a prideful person, it's likely that they won't see it, because pride tends to blind us, right? Mm-hmm. Depending on the relationship, you may want to take a chance, take a shot, a go at sharing some of the observations that you see that are maybe dangerous or hindering their life from being all that it could be. But often the best thing to do is simply to remove yourself from the situation for a period of time and begin to pray for them. Here's what happens. Eventually, a prideful person will have their fall. There will be a humble moment that will meet them somewhere along the way that they'll fall on their face. And it's in that moment, we don't want them to suffer through pain, but we want them to learn a lesson, because for prideful people, sometimes, honestly, that's just what it takes. And I got to say, that's been true for me a lot of times, unfortunately.
If we're talking about toxic people, though, we can't leave out jealous Jane.
Oh, we love jealous Jane.
Yeah. Jealous people are obsessed with comparison and competition. They always think that somebody's after them or after what they have. Jealous people, honestly, are some of the hardest people to be married to, because they're just suspicious of everything. They constantly feel attacked or threatened. They perceive problems everywhere and see things that aren't really there. They're rarely happy for long, as some situation is always going to arise.
Yeah, I think there's a story in the Bible. It's a story of a father and two sons. And the younger son goes out. He actually basically just is really kind of like this arrogant kid, and he asks his dad to get all his inheritance early. And so he goes out, he gives him the inheritance, he goes out and he wastes all the money. And in the midst of all that, he has a humbling experience, and he realizes like, hey, I'm lost. I'm going to go back to dad, and maybe he'll just hire me on as a worker. Well, he goes back to dad, and dad sees them from afar. And the Bible says that he runs to him, he throws his arms around him, gives him a big hug, brings out the best stuff for him, throws a party. It's an amazing just kind of restoration story. It's a picture of us and God and what he does for us. He's always waiting for us and ready for us, no matter where we've been, no matter what we've done. Yeah. But in this story, he gets back and they have the party. And big bro, he's got a problem with little bro. Like, he does not like what's going on. He's like, yo, dad, what are you doing? Like, I've been here the entire time. I've been faithfully serving. I've been working my tail off, and we're throwing a party for little brother. Like, you're going to have to explain this one to me. It doesn't make any sense. But I love what the father says, because this is so helpful for us if we struggle with jealousy. He says, my son, you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. He's saying, listen, this has always been, you've always had access to this. This has always been yours. But he said, we had to celebrate and be glad because the brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. What he was trying to teach him is that to celebrate one person is not to like denigrate or be against another person.
Right. And when you're dealing with a jealous person, we want to try and help them understand that as well, that celebrating one thing doesn't mean that we're denigrating or forgetting the other. We live in a comparison culture, right, that stirs up jealousy and envy. And because of that, it's not easy always to call it out. Because jealousy is like a disease. It's important to either treat it or cut it out of your life before it spreads any further. And unfortunately, that might mean pressing pause or even ending some relationships.
Yeah. So with that, we're going to conclude our 10 types of toxic people to avoid with the last one of our personal favorites, the soul sucker. That's right. Can we just talk about the soul sucker for a moment here? Yeah. These are the people who simply wear you out. They siphon your energy. They steal your joy. Being around them is draining, and you may even feel pressured to always like have to perform and be on because you got to be something for them. They need you to entertain them. Put quite simply, these are not fun people to spend time with. Right. And they may encompass several other types of toxic personalities, people like Helpless Harriet or Negative Norman or the victim, which we talked about. Spending time with a soul sucker is a chore at best.
Yeah. And this might sound a little bit harsh, but the truth is we have a finite amount of energy. And if it's being given to people who don't deserve it, then we don't have enough left to give to the people who do. We can't live with mission and purpose and accomplish all that God has for us if all our energy is being sucked into those types of people. Soul suckers are always around though, so you have to be careful to steer clear of wandering into their path for too long or too often.
That is some good stuff right there. You should just go back and re-listen to that last 30 seconds. But one small piece of advice we want to give you here. If you are married, we just want you to consider something, all right? Let's say, just hypothetical scenario, you get invited over for dinner at a couple's house and, let's say for me, I'm talking to the husband, I'm having a good old time, like we're laughing, we're talking about sports or whatever, you're into, you're just connecting, right?
Yeah.
And your wife is over there and she looks like she's about to die. Okay, this is your cue maybe to exit the evening a little bit early and have a conversation when you get in the car, and you can tell about how awesome he is and the bromance that is creating and stewing here. That's fantastic. But she might be able to tell you like, hey, honey, I love you, but why don't you go hang out with him on your own? Because I honestly was about to die, and if we have to do that again, I won't be around any longer. Like, I can't take that. I think we've probably all been in that situation where one of you connects and the other one doesn't. Yeah. And what you don't want to do is like constantly be in this environment where one of you is really happy, the other one's really miserable, and you're like suffering through. You don't have to do that. Make sure you're communicating, all right? My rant is over.
Yes, good advice. And when it comes to dealing with the soul sucker, we really do want you to communicate with each other so your spouse knows who those people are for you, whether you're hanging out as couples or not. Because then they can help you establish boundaries with those people who drain you. When they see you stuck in a conversation, they can maybe, bail you out a little bit. But it's also important to remember that you're not obligated to help every person around you. If they're too much for you, it's fine to step out of the relationship or simply not enter into a deep one. We all have those types of people who we see on Sundays at church, or maybe we see them passing at work or at parent-teacher stuff at school, but you're not going to have deep, lasting friendships with them, and that's okay.
So there you have it, our list of the 10 types of toxic people that you want to avoid. If we didn't get to maybe the person you were thinking of, you can let us know. But there were definitely some honorable mentions that didn't quite make this list. Maybe they will in a future episode. We're talking about people like the narcissist, the liar, the pretender, the entitled, and there are many, many others. But we're going to dive into some tips for dealing with all sorts of toxic people. But before we do that, if there's something you want us to explore, maybe a toxic person we didn't mention, hit us up on Instagram, Life with 5 Podcast. We'd love to hear from you. But let's get into it. Let's talk about some tips that we can use to deal with some toxic people in our lives.
Yeah, tip number 1 is to establish some boundaries. We've hit on this a fair amount, but we'll just say this. Healthy people know how to respect boundaries, but toxic people don't. So it's a really quick way for you to gauge who you can trust and who you can't.
Come on now. Another tip we have is test the waters. Before diving into a relationship with someone, whether personal or professional, maybe even at church, it's often wise to wade into the shallow end instead of going cannonballing into the deep end. Like I feel like every now and again at church, somebody will be there for the very first time and they'll come up and like, I want to do everything. And like, you don't even know who we are. Like, let's establish a relationship first so we can find out if this is a good fit.
That's good. And next is press pause on the relationship. Sometimes people are in an unhealthy place and they just need some time to work on themselves, work on their attitude. You don't always need to cut them out completely. Instead, you might be able to minimize or temporarily press pause on the relationship until they're in a healthier place.
Can we do this with teenagers? Just pause. Your attitude, just pause it right now.
In our day, you used to do timeout. My kids do pause. It's the strangest thing.
It just shows things are changing. We're getting older. But the next tip we have is be willing to cut off the relationship. Now, I will say, I think some people are too quick to do this, but there are plenty of people, and probably more often than not, I'd see people are too slow to do this. Yeah. While it's true that you may be able to press pause on the relationship, it's not always possible. Yeah. And if their toxicity puts you in a dangerous or an unsafe place, that's a good reason to exit the relationship, and you need to know that you have permission to do that.
Yeah. And the next is to refuse to let bitterness in. This one can be hard, but it really is what's best for you. In fact, the Bible teaches us not only to forgive, but to even pray for our enemies. And that's a really difficult thing. And it's going to require supernatural strength. But with Christ in you, it is possible to do that.
That is not a message you get all the time out in the world, but it is really possible. Mm-hmm. And the last tip we want to say is don't let toxic relationships keep you from healthy community. When we're in unhealthy spaces, the tendency is to gravitate towards safety. So we try to go into preservation mode. We tend to usually isolate ourselves so that we can't be hurt or harmed by other people. And it completely makes sense. We get it. However, we can't live in preservation mode forever. Eventually, we have to get ourselves back out there. I want you to think of it this way. Maybe if you're struggling to get back into a healthy community, if you had a kid and they had a friend who was mean to them, would you tell them to stop making friends? Like, we would never do that, right? Like, no matter, we would tell, like, there's going to be good friends out there. Go out there and eventually you'll find them. Yet sometimes we give ourselves permission to do things that we would not tell our kids to do. I just want to encourage you to think of it that way. So if you're hurting, maybe you've gone through some toxic relationships, find a healthy community.
Yeah. Well, we hope that you've enjoyed this episode and walked away with some practical tips to help you navigate some of these difficult relationships that you might be in. But if you've gotten something from this podcast, would you hit that like button? And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe, hit the bell so you'll be notified of future episodes. But we just want to say thank you to those who have listened to the podcast, who have shared with your friends and family. It really helps us as we work to infuse faith into marriages and families. But thanks again for joining us. We will see you next time.